Hello, welcome to our next panel, everyone. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our next panel. There can only be one: marginalized creatorship and working in multiple mediums. I am very pleased to introduce the moderator for our panel. Please welcome Emmett Nahil.
Hi, FlameCon. Hi. So happy to be here. So happy to have folks come to our little virtual panel. And I'm really proud to be paneling with so many amazing creators. And I am actually going to sort of let them introduce themselves once they come up. But for me personally, I'm a writer, game dev.
Oh, we got a little pause in there in Emmett's feed. Oh, there we go.
Better? Okay.
Yes.
I don't know where I cut off, so apologies. I work in comics.
Go ahead.
I work in comics, game, and prose media. I'm excited about all sorts of different ways of creating. And so with that being said, and without further ado, I will introduce, let the other panelists introduce themselves.
Let's bring them on in, and I'm going to get out of your hair and turn things over to all of you. Enjoy, everyone.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
So yeah, I just wanted to welcome everybody to this sort of conversation. We're going to kind of try and keep it loose, keep it conversational. If we want to go around and you folks introduce yourselves, let people know who you are, what you do, and then we can go into like superhero origin stories and talking a little bit how each one of us got started in our different formats. So I don't know if Sun is over here. I don't know if Sun want to take it away.
It's reversed. So I'm Sun. Similar to Emmett, I work in games, comics, animation, and I'm trying to get more into film. I like to do it all, and I like to do it as much as possible and as frequently as possible.
Awesome. And everyone's pronouns should be on the little bio bar underneath. So just we can keep that in mind. And if any commenters have any questions about that, we also have social media handles in there as well. I think that's everyone's Twitter handles, right?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So I guess we can go clockwise now down. So Zaire, if you want to go ahead.
Hi, I'm Zaire, and I work in games and comics. My pronouns are she, her, and like Sun, I'm hoping to one day get into animation and film one day. That's definitely on my list, and yeah, that's all about me.
Cool. Hi, my name is Kate Dollarhyde. I am a narrative designer, game developer. I also write short fiction, and I'm hoping to bust into novels. So that's me.
Very cool. Very cool. So just to elaborate a little bit more about the title of the panel. So I think any creator of any kind of marginalized identities might have heard the phrase, we already have that, or, there can only be one. We already have a queer XYZ. We already have a brown ABC project. There's always that sort of tension between like individuality and representation, but not too much. I've seen that mostly across like creative fields where people are dealing with, maybe publishers, studios, folks who are sort of gatekeeping that entry. As creators, we want to work in those fields, but we also want to branch out. We want to do different things in different mediums. And so I wanted to sort of ask everyone how they got their start writing specifically, and how they began working in sort of fiction in general as a field. We can go clockwise again. People can just jump in if you have any specific notes on that. But yeah, I'm just curious, what's your superhero origin story? I guess we had to pick it.
Okay, we'll just do clockwise just because I got really stressed about who's gonna talk.
Yeah.
So we'll just stick with clockwise for me anyway, and you can argue with me. But I knew I got started By writing fiction for myself, I'm not shy about admitting that I like started from fandom. I wrote fan fiction a bunch of times. I wrote it through high school. I wrote it through college. And halfway through college, I was making all these like alternative universes, doing all these things. And halfway, I was like, what if they were just mine? What if I was just writing my stuff? And then from there, I like worked really hard to transition my writing into more original so that people would come to look for me for my original work. I admit that, and I know we've talked about it, that I posted a lot of work for free online. And that's like kind of like how I started growing. From there, I started doing my own comics before getting comics jobs. And you were with me, we were on game before getting game jobs. So the access to my origin stories, I did everything first on my own. And I think that like helped a lot to like get people to look at what I'm doing and see my amazing skills. No, I'm just kidding. But,
They're amazing. It's true. I also want to clarify that I as well got my start in fandom, and I think that's really common too. So don't be shy about talking about that too.
Much fanfic. So much.
It's true. It's true. It's a completely it's a viable and admirable avenue. And so yeah, Zaire, what if you want to chat a little bit about how you got started?
I think for me, I was doing the college thing, and I was really, really bad at it. I was like super depressed, failing classes, and I realized I was doing a lot of like what I thought people wanted me to be. Like I thought I needed to like go for pre-med and do something like super smart and fancy, and I didn't really like it. And then after like 10 years of failing, I was like, well, what do I like? And I remembered I used to like make my own comics when I was little. The first comic I ever made was like Captain McMeow Meow. He was a cat detective. And then I bought a PS3 when I was like 20 off Craigslist and like someone's garage. It was really sketchy. And I remember like playing those games and just really enjoying the feeling they gave me and like the interactivity and the stories. And so I started trying to do that. And then Gail Simone's comic school, I think, is what really demystified like how to write comics for me. And then I was like, oh, well, I'll just write my own and do a Kickstarter. And then from there, I got hired at Unknown Worlds. And yeah, it just kind of all happens in like a short time span for me after like I said, years of not doing anything super successfully.
I totally feel that. I think I sort of had the same or similar experience where I was in school, I was in grad school, and I was like mega depressed, and I started writing fan fiction. Again, I guess a lot of us came up through fandom. I had written a lot when I was like in middle school, a little bit in high school, and then hadn't participated in fandom for a long time. And then when I was in grad school and I was in like a very difficult environment, I returned to that place of prior joy and comfort and started writing fan fiction again. That quickly moved into wanting to do original work because, like Sun said, I wanted people to come to my stories for me, not necessarily for the property that I was working in. So started writing short fiction, specifically science fiction and fantasy, mostly fantasy, and grinded away on that for a really long time until I sort of, I don't know, I guess I began to understand how short fiction works. It started selling stories, and that was really cool. Around that time, I was also starting to make Twine games and other narrative games just to get a handle on, like, how does branching storytelling actually work? Because the thing I'm in grad school for, I hate. This industry is really messed up and I don't want to work in it. So what other industries that are really messed up do I want to work in? How about games? So I wanted to teach myself basically how to write for games. And then through a lot of twists and turns, I ended up working at Obsidian. But it started with, like Dragon Age fan games and Twine and my own original short fiction.
That's very cool. That's amazing. The idea of starting out in sort of fan fiction has been sort of, people don't talk about it. They don't enjoy talking about it. But I find recently, through sort of the rise of, fandom as an expression of creativity and sort of a more thorough understanding of that, it's become less like shameful, I guess. It's something that I personally feel very strong about. So it's interesting and cool to hear that so many people have that experience. And came to creativity through a kind of frustration with other media and other facets of industry. So when it comes to working across media, across genre, have you always known that you wanted to branch out? Have you always sort of had that as like a goal? I want to do comics, games, et cetera, or was it sort of you began in one format and sort of ambled your way into another through interest? If y'all want to talk a little about that, go ahead.
We'll do reverse this time.
Oh no! You're like, I wasn't prepared. No, that's good. Yeah, I guess I didn't really think of it that strategically at the start, and maybe I should have, honestly. It was sort of, I viewed different mediums or different genres as different tools to tell different stories. So if I wanted to tell like a very short personal story about one person going through an incredible event or a pivot moment in their life, short fiction is really good for that. You get in, you get out, you get an experience, and it's over. But I also really sort of gravitated to the sort of puzzle building way of doing branching narratives. And I thought that was like a really fun and sort of challenging way to basically do dialogue puzzles or tell dialogue stories, to really focus on one character in a larger world. So it was sort of like, as my interests grew and I became a little more confident in my work, I said like, okay, what else can I do that is challenging and interesting? So, hopefully someday maybe I write a screenplay, just because that to me seems like the hardest thing to do, because it's the thing I've never done.
Definitely.
Yeah. I think for me, it's a little bit of like, I want to do it, and I also stumbled into it. I think some of those processes they seem like mystical almost. Like, how do I do this? How do I make branching narrative? Like, oh God, this is so complicated. Like, you know what I mean? And I think just having like a community that shares resources, or like Gail Simone did with Comic School, and like several thousand people a day were like sending out little comic strips, and it was like, clearly people want to do these things, but they don't know how to. And I think making those available, especially for people who are marginalized, is when you start getting like a whole new type of story out there. And I think as that continues to happen, I think more people will like stumble into these like new media just because they can. Like, if I wanted to make a movie, I would have no idea. But if like, I don't know, Steven Spielberg was like, oh, here's a 5-day thing on Twitter on how you can make a 5-minute short film, I will be all over that. And I think the more people that do that, the more it'll become like not mystical. It's just like, you just don't know how to do it. It's not magic.
Yeah, it's about sort of removing objects to gatekeeping, basically. I totally agree with that. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, because I noticed from everyone's story up to this point that we all discussed like how we grinded a bit before like getting somewhere, and then we suddenly got a lot of things very fast, and then like pittered, and then grinding, and then getting a lot of things very fast. But I am the same way. Like, I grew really obsessed with trying other mediums actually pretty early on. I've been obsessed with visual storytelling for as like long as possible. So I knew that when I was writing prose, I was like, I really want to try comics like right away. And I could tell because my prose was just like 10 pages of dialogue, and then like I'd say like, and they were in a house. And so ever since like, so I think I jumped into comics. And I learned on the go, which is why I don't look at my first comic. And then I immediately, after was like confident in comics, I was like, great, you know what the next step is? Games. And then I want to be like, okay, what if the comics were moving? And then I jumped further into that. And that's kind of like been the pathway that I've been following. And so anytime I see a new medium that I like want to learn how to write, because we all know that like when you're writing for a different medium, it's a completely different skill. Even though writing is the core, you're like sitting and learning how to do it in that way. And so like right now I'm like, podcasts are actually really cool. What if I relearn how to write for them? So anything I just don't know, I get really obsessed with for a period of time.
It's awesome.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense in terms of going where your interests lie. For me personally, whenever I start with sort of a kernel of an idea, you know, I have a concept or an image in my mind, and pretty soon after that, I'll know, okay, this is going to be a comic, or this should be a game, or I'm going to make a script out of this. For me, that process is tied to sort of a weird, inaccessible, almost mystical element. I was wondering, when y'all are thinking of sort of what you want to do next, is it in a context where you are coming from the base of, you know, idea first or media first? And we can go clockwise once again, I guess that way.
It's definitely idea first for me. I tend to do concept work pretty fast. It doesn't take much to like make me think that I have an idea. And then usually the debate is what medium. And I know that it is actually something I really struggle with because, you know, as writers, we try to work within our means, which is sometimes like, how can I execute this with involving the like least amount of people? So that way I'm not like making this a huge thing, or maybe I do want to involve as many people as possible. And like that's something like we think about when we're doing comics or games, because it is a team effort when you transcend in that. And so I always first really debate if I need it to be a visual thing, if I feel like it has to be. And then from there, I debate like, what are the beats? And that usually tells me if it's for comics or for something with more animation or for something that's like games. It's usually the beats that kind of tell me where I need to go.
For me, I think it's definitely idea first, and I either work in comics or like Twine. I don't know how to do anything else, and so I think I just like have an idea. I'll get, like Sun said, I'll get the concept art, and then that's that. It's like blast off and go for it. I'm still struggling with like, would this be better as like a comic? Would this be better as maybe like an illustrated like 12-page story? But I think that's something that just comes with time. I feel like my brain gets ahead of my like work endurance sometimes, and so it's really hard because like especially once I like did Bone Herder, I was like, oh, I can literally just like make comics anytime I want, and then I had like 15 ideas, and I was like, hold on now, I'm not Rockefeller over here. I don't have money like that, you know? So like, I just kind of like try to pick what like resonates with me the most and kind of stick with that.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah. I'd say for me, they're sort of simultaneous. It's like if I have an idea, it's like a gameplay idea, well, then that has to be a game. Like a special game mechanic or like a way that a game world would work. For story ideas, I guess the debate for me is more like, is this a short story? Is this a novel? And really the thing that sort of decides it is the complexity level. I love to build worlds. I love big, complicated stories. I love huge casts and a lot of like interconnecting subplots and all that stuff. So almost always it has to be a novel, just because a short story can't sustain that kind of detail. So it's tough because I feel like my narrative game stuff and my book story stuff, while they sort of maybe spring from the same creative well, they're like totally separate in my mind. They're both compartmentalized. I don't think about them in the same way necessarily. And I maybe bring the same skills, but not the same way of generating ideas or building on those ideas in each medium.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense in terms of delegating based on complexity too, because then it's a matter of, what are my time constraints, what are my resources versus, the logistics of I'm working with this specific illustrator who is going to require this amount of, this page rate per comic. So it's, I think the difference between specifically in that comes up as a difference when we're talking about self-publishing versus, studio work and versus sort of independent creatorship, right? Because I know, Kate, you've done a lot of editorial work as well and worked sort of with other authors on that. In terms of working with independent authors versus working with your own sort of long form media, versus working at some place like Obsidian, is there, do you sort of tend to reserve things for yourself? Are there ideas that you will sort of hold on to because you know you will only have the time and space to do it later on? Or is it sort of a constant roll of like things coming up that you have to pick and choose from?
I definitely keep some things to myself. I mean, there's also the additional wrinkle of like working at a large studio owned by a large corporation like Microsoft. All the ideas I give to the studio become owned by the studio, and I can't take them back. So I try not to pitch things to the studio that I wouldn't be okay losing if it never gets made or if I move on to a different company.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to be very, not territorial in my ideas, but protective of them. Keep the ones that are most important to me, close to my heart, so that I can put them in my own novels or my own short stories. But I think like talking about like energy and time and where we sort of spread our work for editorial, like working with other writers to bring their ideas to life, it's like a totally different type of energy. And I feel like it doesn't take as much for me as it rejuvenates me, because it's helping people, see their ideas come to life, and maybe just looking for a couple places where they can sort of shore up or buttress some ideas that aren't necessarily coming through as strongly as they could. So I don't know, those things don't necessarily interact, except where I am protective over my personal things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense in terms of how I go about doing editorial work as well. I find it uses a totally different set of skills and a different brain space. It's so different. And in that way, it's almost a separate conversation than, what media do you like to work in, I think. I feel like the conversation is sort of trending in the direction of, benefits of self-publication when you're working across media. I know San has a lot of thoughts about that in particular, so I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that.
Everyone should self-publish. I like I said, I got my start from self-publishing. I always joke that social media is my friend despite its toxicity, because I've gotten my start from social media. I spent a lot of time self-publishing, sharing my work online, promoting my work online, and kind of getting it out there in ways that I knew that I wouldn't be able to at the level I was when I started. And like, I know this is all something we've experienced. We don't have connections when we start, especially when we're transitioning from another field. We're usually in a bubble, and we have to like kind of push ourselves out there in ways to start forming these connections. So where I was a year ago in self-publishing is already vastly different where I am now. And so, yeah, I think that self-publishing, especially for learning other mediums, is a really good way to get started. I would argue the other side of that coin is that if you're not careful and you don't follow kind of like protecting yourself, you kind of fall for anything a little bit. I know that I did a lot of free work when I started. I know that a lot of my work has been taken that is no longer mine just because I've shared it on social media, things like that. It's inevitable. It's kind of like, I kind of like roll the roulette and I'm like, whatever happens, happens, but maybe I'll get like some success later. So it's a game you play with yourself. So whether or not you want to take the risk is totally up to you. I do think that traditional publishing is great, especially in all mediums, from games to books. But I think that there's a lot of power in self-publishing, and the way that the internet is kind of like shaping how we market ourselves and how we promote ourselves has really allowed this avenue to thrive. So yeah, that's my personal thoughts. I think everyone can try to do it. It is an expensive endeavor. This does not become cheaper. I want to say that. But it definitely is something that I think a lot more people have access to than we used to.
Definitely. And I mean, with sort of the advent of something like a Kickstarter, like a GoFundMe type system, we've seen a much clearer path towards self-publication in different media as well. So someone can be working on sort of traditionally published work as well as kickstarting a comic or funding their own game that way. And Zaire, I know you recently had a lot of success with the Boneherder Kickstarter, so number one, congratulations. But everyone who's watching, if they have not checked out Boneherder, go to Zaire's Twitter. It's incredible. But point being is that you have had this sort of this great success with the self-publishing self-published project. I was wondering if you could chat a little bit about if that's impacted your thoughts on self-publishing as an avenue. Have your priorities changed at all in that vein?
Yeah, I don't feel like I don't feel as much like I have to be validated by getting picked up by like a pre-existing establishment. Like I don't feel like I have to get something like put into an Image or a Marvel or a DC in order to like be considered successful. And it's honestly kind of freeing because now I'm like doing the Bone Herder really forced me to like figure out how to market myself. I know I talked to Sun and Emmett about it. Like how do you like I'm pretty shy. Like on Twitter, I probably don't seem like it because I don't know, with this pandemic, it's the only way I can talk to people. But like I definitely like it showed me like I have an audience, I think, for the stories I want to tell. And there's like with Kickstarter and like a good team, like it's a viable way to get yourself out there. I don't think I would have gotten considered for Unknown Worlds necessarily on Subnautica if I hadn't just had that successful Kickstarter. So I think it's a way that like if it's something you really want to do and you have the means to do it, like I pay it out of pocket for like concept art and I just started running with it, and I think it's empowering. It's scary, but I really enjoyed it. Like the only thing I have an issue with is like the number of boxes that are going to be in my living room soon. Like but otherwise I think it was a good experience. Like even if I had failed, I think it would have still been a good experience.
Mm-hmm. And parlaying that into sort of a success in a sort of different but maybe adjacent avenue, which would be games for you, is also, it's an extremely interesting thing to do, and it's an extremely interesting avenue to take. It can offer a lot of sort of self-publishing in that way can offer sort of a lot of less immediate but no less material advantages for folks as well, especially for marginalized folks who are looking to sort of get away into other industries that might otherwise be gatekept by like, degree requirements, for example, talking about not liking school. And being sort of self-taught in that way can really sort of prove your experience and prove your durability in an industry where that might not be immediately apparent based on prior work.
Right.
And yeah, it's a super interesting way to look at building a career for me. To change gears slightly, in this world, once you are able to sort of branch out, or once you're thinking of branching, have you folks ever felt sort of the pressure to be like the most skilled at one thing, and how did you combat that urge, or how did you explain to people that I can be extremely skilled at multiple things despite preconceived notions? Just wondering if anyone had that experience or how you've combated it, stuff like that.
I will, if it's okay, I'll start. So I often joke with Emmett that I like lead a double life. At the same time as working in games and comics, I'm also getting my PhD in evolution in biology. And I've often felt like imposter syndrome because of it. So I'm doing these two completely separate like mediums at all times. And I get like, sometimes I get nervous that maybe I'm not good at either because I'm spreading myself thin. And I know that happens between writing from prose to comics. I know that after I was writing comics a lot, I thought like my prose writing was going to get really weak. And so the way that I kind of like combated this and no longer, I mean, I still do. I'm not here to pretend I'm like on some high horse that I don't feel like a little emo sometimes. But I've learned that the way that I want to do things, the way that I want to tell stories, regardless of the medium, the kind of structure that I like, the kind of storytelling that I like, the aesthetics that I like, the mood, all that stuff are very unique to me. And I think that once I got comfortable with the idea that I was the only one who could do the thing that I wanted to do, and even if someone had the same idea, it would just not be executed in the same way. And I think once I understood that, and I'm still understanding that, I've like lessened that kind of pressure I've put on myself. So I kind of find that as like the ultimate answer to that kind of question for me personally.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
I think I struggle with that because there aren't a lot of like Black women in the industry. Sometimes I'm like, oh man, I should be so thankful, and I should stay in my lane and not like reach out. Like, you don't want to like make too much noise. I don't want to like offend anyone. I don't want to like set anyone off because I was like, hey, this is maybe not like the most inclusive idea, or you know, something like that. So I think it is something where like I feel like I have to be like the model minority, which is like something I think a lot of people can struggle with, and a lot of it, I think it's something like over time and like working on it, you're like, no, like I'm good at what I do. Like Sun said, like even if two people have the same idea, they execute it very differently, and realizing like, hey, I have good ideas, like, and then looking like at your past accomplishments is really good for that, because like when I doubt myself, I like pull up the Kickstarter page and I'm like, oh damn, I have good ideas sometimes, you know. Not all the time, but I think it comes with like trial by fire almost, like you're gonna have those like shitty days, but like I'm sorry, but like over time it's like a better feeling.
Definitely.
Yeah, I feel like confidence is definitely something I struggled with. It's something I still struggle with. And what's rough is that there's like variable levels of confidence depending on what you're working in. Like, I feel like I'm reasonably good at my job now, my day job, and that's cool. But when I first started at the studio, I did not feel that way at all. I felt really out of place and really scared that I was going to get fired at any moment for sucking super bad. But what helped me sort of get through that was that there were other women on the writing team, which was an incredible luxury. I'm realizing now, since I've been in the industry for a few years, there were other women on the writing team to sort of mentor me and uplift me and treat me with care and consideration and take my ideas seriously to help me build that confidence. So, you know, when I get thrown into the deep end, it's like, please write these critical path conversations that every player who plays the game will see. You've been here 2 weeks, good luck. I was terrified, but then I had people rooting for me in the background or helping me review my stuff and make it stronger to really help me build that confidence. But then on the flip side, to go to novels, which is a mostly solo endeavor, I've been, you know, writing prose fiction for like 10 years at this point, and I still don't feel like I'm that good at it. Or I go through cycles of feeling like I'm good at it, right? Where it's like I have a minor success and I'm like, yeah, I'm the best. And then it's like you go into the trough of despair where it's like, actually, I'm garbage. Everything I do is bad.
So relatable.
Right? It's just like a roller coaster. It's like every half hour, it's like I'm the best and I'm the worst. And so for me, building my confidence there has really been about building a community of other writers to interact with, to really commiserate with, to share work with, so that I can see what other people are doing and see not necessarily how I stack up, but basically how we approach different ideas. And I can, you know, learn from the way that they approach different ideas and incorporate that into my own work and vice versa. And it makes me feel like the more knowledge that I can gobble up, like the better, hopefully, my work will be. That is sort of how I deal with the confidence problem. And I'm not sure that it's necessarily the best way, but it is a way.
Well, I think it's about continually learning across media, because something that I think a lot of folks who are just starting out, and I mean, myself included in the grand scheme of things, I'm just starting out, you know. I think the thing and the key is not getting overconfident about your knowledge, but being confident about your voice and about your skills across media, basically, and saying, you know, the voice and, you know, my particular way of attacking this problem will be very distinct and will be what sets me apart. But these tools have been laid out by other people beforehand, and I can have access to these tools through community, through writing groups, through other things. So sort of in that vein, how do you keep your voice? Have you ever had the opportunity to sort of, or not have you ever had the opportunity, have you ever had the problem, I guess, of worrying that you're losing your voice across media in different contexts, be it in the studio or to a media that you've never tried before? Or is that not a concern that you have? I guess anyone who wants to go.
I
Go ahead.
I was like looking at you like, do you want to go? But I guess this is going to sound super cocky, but I don't think I lose my voice depending on the media. It's not that because I think that like my voice is just like these types of words that I like to use or things like that. But I think my voice is really aligned with how, like I said, how I approach things. And I think that, and that's something I really wanted to work on when I did leave fandom, quote unquote, where I was like, whatever project I'm doing, it's a Sun project, and you will know it's a Sun project, whether it's the comics or the animations, the games, or even the books. It's like, you'll know it's me. And I really work to have that angle. Now that I'm working, let's say, with like a studio, I do like definitely play with the thought that I'm like, oh, will it like still look like me? But there are things that you can do that I think can still lead back to you. And then I would also want to argue that sometimes when you are working, let's say, in a studio or like a bigger like project that you're just like a kind of a cog in the machine, it's okay to like not have your voice be the most prominent voice. It's part of working in a team, and it's part of like working in a group setting. So I think that I've grown comfortable with the idea that if I'm working on a big project, it won't be my voice. But if it's a project that I am directing or like working on and like leading, then it will sound like me. It's inevitable. I'm overbearing.
I don't think I have as much experience with that, just because I don't have like a breadth or depth of projects. I've got like Lone Herder and Unknown Worlds and like little stuff I do on my own that's not like public. It's just me messing around. But I know working at a studio, it takes getting used to working with a team and like changing your process to fit with like what benefits the team the most. Like my first week, like when I write, I always like write stuff out in a notebook first so I don't get distracted. And then at some point between like 12 and 3 a.m., I might put it onto the computer. And so I was doing that for like a week, and they were like, hey, are you doing any work? And I was like, oh yeah, it's right here, it's notebook. And they're like, okay, can you like put it on where we can see it too? So I think for me, it was like not only adjusting like my voice to being edited, but also just like benefiting from this is how a team works together, and this is like what you need to do to benefit everyone, and like learning how to like be a cog in a machine. Like you're not like trying to be the person in the choir with a solo. You're like trying to put something out together.
I think that's a really good way of looking at it. I think when I first started writing in games, I was a little concerned about losing my prose voice because I'd worked very hard on developing it. And what I found was that I gained a new voice instead, or just like a variation on the one that I had sort of created in prose fiction, where I maybe have to subsume a little bit more of the like literary tendencies and go for, depending on the project, like really flex my humor muscles, like on the Outer Worlds, for example. I'm not a great humor writer, but it's just a very humorous game. So trying to figure out how I can bring my voice, like my aesthetic, my concerns to this very different medium and also very different genre, and say like, okay, well, how can I learn from this and incorporate this into my voice was a challenge. But I feel like the characters that I write, the Kate characters, there's still Kate elements in them, in part just because you can't get away from yourself, right? You're always going to have your own style. But one of the joys about, I think, working in a team environment, working at a studio, working on a big project is you get a chance to learn a new way of working. Like working in a team, like sometimes you have to sort of subsume your writerly identity into the identity of the project, and really might help your voice mesh with the voice of the project. And I feel like that's a great skill. That's why so many people from games maybe end up in fandom end up in games, because when you're writing in a fandom, you're learning the voice of this project, and then you're putting your own spin on it, and that's fan content. And that's something you sort of have to do in games. It's like, okay, well, here's the voice of the world. Take that into yourself, you spin it around, and then you put it back out into the game. That's sort of been my experience.
It makes a huge amount of sense to me too. I mean, just talking about having to collaborate and having to change your process in a way that can sort of subsume your own ego, but not subsume your own ability to advocate for yourself is such a tricky thing to do, and it's such a tricky line to walk. When going into sort of maybe a form of media that you haven't tried before, I know Sun mentioned earlier on trying to figure out, how fiction podcasts work and working in that. How's the learning curve? Like, do you find it takes you do you find having already crossed over into a different media, you are then able to continually like add to your metaphorical Pokedex of skills like fairly easily, or is the learning curve still as steep every time? I have found that the learning curve is a little bit less steep every time, but I'm just curious, like how is that process gone for you, trying to do different things? I don't know if Kate, you want to start off since.
Oh, okay.
Please.
Sorry, I'm so bad at this, like going in a circle and going back.
No, that's okay.
I think for me, it depends on how close the new media that I'm working in is to things I've worked in before. Like I've never worked in comics or film, and I feel like working on a script for both is maybe related or similar. And I would think those would be both hard climbs for me for both. But if I were doing like a something adjacent to games, like maybe a fiction podcast would be a little bit more my speed because it's going to leverage skills that I already have developed in prose and games. Yeah, I don't know. That's a really interesting question. I'm interested to hear everyone else's takes on that.
I think it's steep, but I think if it's because we're all writers and it's all something that we've like, I don't know, ingrained in our DNA. It's like a steep climb, but like I feel like you start out maybe like a third of the way up the mountain instead of like at the bottom. It's like a familiar territory. I don't know. It's like, I don't know, weird analogy, but like when I go up north in Wisconsin and I'm in the woods, and then like if I go visit my family in Michigan, it's like not the same woods, but I'm like familiar with how woods work and like navigating them, I guess.
It's not like going to the ocean, you know.
Right, it's not like going to the ocean. Although I have Lake Michigan, which for all intents and purposes is really a small ocean. Like it's like 100 miles across. It's huge. But yeah, I think it's like, oh, this isn't the same thing. But like writing a comic script for me was informed by like my short film scripts. It was like similar because I'm not like filming the short film, but I'm thinking of how it might go. And so that translated at least somewhat to comics. So that's my take on it. Like it's steep, but it's not, but you're starting off in like a better place than if I was just jumping into something completely different, like being a chef or something. I don't know.
I'm in a big agreement. I actually think that media tends to feed each other pretty well. So if you're like confident in one, like you said, you kind of start halfway, ready for the other. And something I've learned with writers, specifically writers who attempt to tackle other mediums, but like give it the time and care. I noticed that we tend to dissect things that we view anyway. So even before comics, I was dissecting story beats in film. And like my hot take is that helps with comics and things of the like. And so I feel like that I can tell when it's a learning curve for me when I don't have a lot of experience. And I mean, even just listening. So like fiction podcasts, I don't listen to podcasts. I'm a very visual person. So if I don't have something like being viewed in front of me, I actually find it very difficult. And so that feels like incredibly steep to me, despite being really confident in writing dialogue and storytelling and things like that. And it's because I think I don't understand like the beats, which is like what I keep going back to versus like you said, Kate, with comics and scripts, I do think like they easily like kind of fall into each other. But I think like other than the little nuances in between. So I'm really, I guess my answer is that, yeah, you can do anything if you learn the basics, and then you can just spend time in that medium until you feel confident to either like continue to much higher places or to transition. I don't really believe in jack of all trades, master of none. I think you can be a master of all trades as long as you dedicate the time to it. And like you said, Emmett, or if you're willing to always be learning, the moment you stop learning is the moment it's over. Then you are the jack of nothing.
So what I'm getting from y'all is that it's sort of about adjacency to what you've already done, as well as sort of doing your homework. Talking about not liking school, doing fun homework, you know, of ingesting the content that you want to make and that you want to do. To sort of jut off in a slightly different direction, is there one particular is there one medium or one sort of avenue to storytelling that you have not gotten to do, but you absolutely are desperate to do? Or have you sort of covered the bases that you want to cover?
I
Go ahead.
I can go first.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to do animation. I think like a bone herder anime would slap, and
It would.
I like, especially if it's done in like, I don't know, the vein like Castlevania, like the animation style. Like I think about that probably like 3 times a week. Like I was on the website like, how much for 5 minutes of footage, you know? But yeah, I think animation is so cool, and it affords you like so many different types of stories that like don't necessarily look good on like live action, like some media that shall not be named. But like, yeah, I think animation is just, it's got so much going for it, and there's so many different styles, and I just think it would be amazing to have worked on any kind of animated medium, especially like your own original work, especially with people that look like me. And like, it gets me like excited to like one day do that.
To take a pause real quick, we only have about 15 minutes left. So for anyone in the audience who has any questions, please just comment wherever you're watching, and we can see your questions, and we'll be able to answer them at the end. We're going to take about 5 to 10 minutes at the end after this question to answer audience questions. So yeah, go on, whoever wants to go next.
I guess I just want to do bigger things. So I am not like I've been, I know I've talked to, I think, Zaire and Emmett about this, but I've been trying to get this animated show made for like 5 years, and I'm still going to keep trying until like I die. One day someone will say yes and I will win. But I really just want to keep like upping the ante of like what I'm working on. So like my dream for Perfect Garbage is that we're making like indie, but like really strong, powerful. Like we just keep, every game just becomes like a better and better version of what we were doing. For all of the stories that I want to write, I want them to just keep getting bigger and more expansive and like nonstop. I will write 100-book series if it kills me. Like I'm ready to keep going and going and going. So it's less for me about like what medium do I really want to, and more about how big can I get in the medium that I'm working on, and how happy can I get with what I'm doing. So that's my goal.
I love your vision. I think that's so great. I think for me, I sort of love the teamwork aspect of working on games. I love working in a writer's room. I love kicking around ideas with other writers. So I'd love to work on like a serialized novel project. I know there's a couple of folks that are doing that, a couple of companies like Serial Box. Sort of get 4 or 5 novelists or short story writers in a room and say like, okay, create a world and a story. Everyone gets to write a chapter, and it's on a rotation, and you have a story coming out a week. Good luck. To me, that sounds so much fun.
That sounds so cool. Like I never heard that. I'm like, what?
So fun. Yeah, it's sort of like the Netflix model for books. I'd also super love to work on just talking about game genres. I really want to make an immersive sim. I'm desperate to make an immersive sim. Someone give me money to make an immersive sim.
I wish I had money to give you. Really cool.
It's my favorite genre, and I just love the marriage of gameplay and narrative when they become the same thing. Or like a game like Bloodborne, where you really have to find the narrative for yourself. You have to go seek out those beats. It really requires a lot of active participation from the player or the viewer or the reader or whatever. So those are the 2 things I'm really psyched on right now. And I'm going to try and take some of Sun's energy and feel that in my heart of like, I will do this, I will win, or I will die.
Awesome. I love all those answers. I think everyone's going to, I'm an optimist, so I'm like, everyone's going to do it. There's no question. Y'all are going to succeed. But I think that's all a great place to end off for now, and we can start taking some audience questions from the comments. So I figure we can just go in order from the ones that I'm seeing. So from Danny D, I have, do you have any good resources / books for transitioning from writing prose to comics? So to sort of start off a little bit, I did not go to school for writing, period. I went to school for art history, different skill set terrible in a different way. But when I sort of started out doing prose, I had an art historical background, and so I started thinking visually about the prose that I was writing. Having that sort of visual mind and being able to picture the shots, picture each of your panels individually will be a much better starting point for beginning to write comics when you've already been writing prose, is sort of thinking about storyboarding almost. I don't have any good resources or books in particular. I don't know if anyone else has any suggestions for that.
There's a lot of amazing websites right now for learning how to write scripts that I've used. I'm sorry that I'm not like remembering at the top of my head, but I will somehow get it out there again. But,
I can post it on Twitter at the end if people want to take a peek. I can post all the recommendations. But yeah, go on. Sorry.
Yeah. So basically, people, and something I've also learned is that people publish their scripts. Oftentimes, you can look up scripts for movies, games, sometimes games. Actually, games are a little harder. But movies, comics, things of the like, and that's a really great jumping off point. I know I mentioned that. Sometimes I watch movies and take notes on beats so I can understand visually like when things would happen the best, things like that. And then honestly, just reading comics will help you immensely. Just reading them.
Yeah. For me, it really was Gail Simone's Comic School on Twitter. And I think it's actually really good because it was just 5 days. You end up with an 8-page comic. And if you look up the hashtag Comic School, you'll see probably several thousand scripts from people who are just like you, who are starting out. So it's a little less intimidating. You're not looking at like some legendary like Marvel writer being like, wow, that's amazing. I definitely can't do that. It's just like normal people who are like are interested in it just like you. And like Sun said, I will go to my public library. I mean, not now, but and come back with like a stack of 25 comic books. It's a really good resource. And yeah, you'll start to see those story beats, like repeating themes, like how people do things. And once you kind of like know the rules, that's when you can start to break them. But yeah, I find the Comic School like super, super accessible for people who haven't done it before.
Definitely. Cool. If you want to hop on over to the next question. From Zephyr, we have, how do you choose a day job that is sustainable for you emotionally, financially? Is it trial and error or other things you can watch for? For me personally, as somebody who had been working food service up until very, very recently, it is trial and error. If you can't get a day job that is in your field, or if you don't want a day job that's in your field, if you'd rather separate those two things, I find that the best option is finding some place that is less emotionally taxing, because as writers and as folks who are doing creative work, it's one thing to be physically tired, it's another thing to be emotionally drained and not to have that bandwidth. So for me, I like to prioritize sort of that emotional health first. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts about that.
No, you go ahead, please.
I worked in childcare and education, and I would absolutely not suggest doing that because it requires anything, like Emmett said, it's so much emotional energy and like putting yourself out there. So like the kids are taking bits and pieces of you because you need to like make them happy and emotionally strong beings. So I know that's like specific, but like if you don't have to work as an educational assistant, do not work as an educational assistant. I promise you, you will be exhausted by the end of the day.
Yeah, I'm with you. In previous jobs, I've worked on solar panels, I've worked in publishing, places with really like emotionally fraught or draining atmospheres really impacted my ability to do any writing. Whereas when I was like delivering pizzas or working a stall in the farmer's market, I was physically very tired at the end of the day, but those were like pretty low drama jobs for me, at least. So being able to like go to work, do some standing on my feet for 8 to 10 hours, then come home and just being able to think about my own story the whole time instead of whatever madness was going on in the office really sort of saved those emotional juices that I could put towards writing.
I cheated. I'm a student, so I cannot answer this question.
You're stipended. It's a cheat. So a question from Ronnie Garcia. Also, how do you balance working a day job that may not work best with your creative workflow? I think the key is carving it, knowing your time and knowing your schedule really intimately, and then finding those pockets of time to like wiggle your creative flow into your spare time. It sounds like sort of a cop-out answer, but just knowing your schedule and being able to really block out any time that you can is what helped me when I was working my day job.
I want to add that since, like I said, my two fields are like really different, what I found is that an hour before, or maybe like 30 minutes before, I was like, time to be creative. I would do things that would make me feel creative. I would listen to like a whole playlist. I would watch a movie really fast. I'd watch maybe a couple episodes, something I like. And it would usually get me in the mood to like be like, I can do this kind of attitude. So I actually recommend doing things like your hobbies right before you're supposed to be creative, because it kind of will spark a kind of transition. I know I needed it. It's like a switch for me.
For me, look, I'm all over the place. When something strikes me, like I find I have to pounce on it. Otherwise, I will not get that creative spark back. And I'm working on like the discipline to be like, it doesn't matter if you have the creative spark, go sit down and write something. It's a discipline more than like being motivated, because I have ADHD. I don't have insurance. I don't have medication. So I don't work with motivation. I work with discipline. And I think that's something that like, if your day job doesn't like work with your workflow, it's kind of like tough cookies. You have to start to try to like do it. And it's really hard. And I like completely understand. It's really frustrating, but it's something you have to do, and do in a way that's healthy. Because at one point I would like, my girlfriend would go to bed and I would stay up till like 4 a.m. getting random sparks of creativity, and it's not sustainable, and you'll really burn yourself out. And it's just like they said, like carving out those times in the day and like getting them, like creating that spark for yourself and making sure you stick with it.
Yeah, definitely. I think Zaire and Sun are right on the money. Also, I would add, pay attention to when you actually feel creative, and then design or to the best that you can, work your schedule around those times. I know for me, like I have a lot of writer friends who get up first thing in the morning. They get up at like 6:30 and write 2,000 words. And I'm proud of those people. That's amazing. That couldn't be me. Game dev starts at 9:30 and I'm like, ooh, I'm real tired. Whereas I feel most creative at between like 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. So that's when I do the majority of my writing. And
Yep.
Some days I write 100 words and I'm like, that sucked, but it's 100 more words than I had yesterday. And so knowing when you're creative, making time to do the creative work when you best feel able to access that well, and then being kind to yourself and making peace with incremental progress. You don't have to jam out 2,000 words in a day. You don't have to get into a flow state. Honestly, the stuff that you write that's sort of like piecemeal sentences in between doing other things, looking back, you won't be able to tell when you wrote those, like when you were in the zone or when you were cooking dinner. So I try to fit it into your schedule wherever you can, and just make peace with incremental progress, as hard as that is to maybe hear.
So right now it looks like we have only about 2 minutes left. So unfortunately, I think we're going to have to cut off the questions a little bit short. But I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for being here to chat. In the banners down below, we have some tip jars, some Ko-Fi links, so that if you enjoyed our talk and want to support us and support our work, you can toss us some tips there. As always, if anyone has any further questions, I'm always available on Twitter. I don't want to volunteer anyone else, but if you have any questions that we can answer there, you can @ me and I'll pass it on to panelists and we can try our best to answer those questions. Yeah, as we go out, do you have one project that you want to just shout out real quick? San, go ahead.
Not me first. Love Shore is a really cool game. Emmett and I work on it. Find us at Love Shore Game on Twitter. That's it. Great.
Zaire?
Probably Boneheader is what I'm working on the most right now. It's my Afropunk fantasy horror graphic novel. Yeah, that's sounds interesting to you.
And Kate, go ahead.
Sweet. I guess I'll shout out Peril on Gorgon. It's the first Outer Worlds DLC. It's coming September 9th, I want to say. I got to be co-narrative lead on that one. It was a lot of fun, and I hope people enjoy it.
I can't wait.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. This has been great. And yeah, I'll let y'all take it away from here.
Cool.
Round of applause for everyone for such a wonderful panel for There Can Only Be One. Thank you all for joining us for this panel. The next panel, it's a workshop, it's a cosplay workshop. It is starting right now. It is about how to make things fancy. Also encouraging everyone to go to our Twitter and Instagram feeds. That's InstaFlameCon for Instagram, where you can find all of the artists and creators that we are promoting through this day of virtual FlameCon with the hashtag FCOpenFlame. And if you're an artist and creator and want your work to be shared through there, tweet at us with the hashtag FCOpenFlame. Thank you all for joining, and head on over to the next panel. It's already happening right now. And if you're on YouTube, just go to our page on YouTube. It'll be there as well. So thank you all for joining.